The Los Angeles Clippers have rightfully been given the title of having one of the best offseasons in the entire NBA, but when most people think of this, they think it's all because of the Bradley Beal signing, when in reality, that's just a small fraction of why this offseason was so great. Today we're going over the Los Angeles Clippers season preview and going over the trades and signings they've made this offseason and talking about what we can expect from next season. Like I was saying before, a lot of people have been thinking about this Los Angeles Clippers team and the big moves they've made this summer, but they're only thinking about the Bradley Beal signing, when in reality, there's a lot of different things that happened that made it so this was possible. If we went back in time to right when the Clippers got eliminated from the first round of the playoffs, when they went to 7 games against the Nuggets, so they took the Nuggets to 7 games. That same Nuggets team went on to play the Thunder, who ended up winning the championship. That Nuggets team took that Thunder team to 7 games, pushed the Thunder probably the hardest any team possibly could, and it was the same team that was having problems from the Clippers. And I don't think people think about that and how the Clippers might actually be closer than a lot of people think. And with the offseason trades and signings they've made, and hopefully a little health luck, they potentially could have a really good chance of having a title contending team. So we're going to go over that. We're going to talk about the couple trades they made, couple signings they've made, and how it's all possible that they've done this, because money just doesn't just open up like this randomly. There has to be like pay cuts and people taking pay cuts in order to make this happen. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I first want to talk about the first trade they made. So they traded Norman Powell, who was probably their second or their third best player last year. He had a breakout season, was averaging about 20 points per game, and they made a trade, a 3-team trade with the Jazz, the Heat, and the Clippers, where the Clippers ended up with John Collins. And when you first look at this, it kind of was a head scratcher. Like, John Collins is a really good player, and it makes sense looking at it. Like, it's not like they lost the trade, but you're thinking about why you're trading away this player that just had such a great season for your team, and it comes down to money. Norman Powell is, honestly, he's kind of old for having a breakout season, but he was going to demand a lot of money in free agency, and the Clippers just didn't have the flexibility in order to do that, to be able to keep this team together and be able to add key pieces. And so they traded for John Collins, who is on an expiring deal, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a really big Jazz fan, so I've been able to watch John Collins the last couple years, and he's very underrated. You're able to trade Norman Powell and get a player that can play your backup, your starting power forward, and then you could, last season, the power forward spot was definitely the lowest and worst position for the Clippers, because they had Kawhi Leonard playing the small forward, and they had Derrick Jones Jr. playing quite a bit power forward, starting a lot of the power forward position. And if you want to be a competent NBA team competing for a title, you probably don't want him starting your power forward. So trading, getting John Collins, getting a player to be an actual power forward for your team is a major upgrade, especially when he was averaging about 20 points a game himself. He was somewhere around 19, along with about 9 rebounds, and was shooting like 40% from the three-point line. When he was on the Hawks, he was not known as a three-point shooter, and he didn't really shoot that great in his first year or first couple years with the Jazz. But last year, I think he was the best player in the Jazz last year, if I'm being honest. He was lighting it up from 3. He was playing great. He was playing really good hustle defense, was able to play backup center. When he first came to the Jazz, he was the primary center, and then he went to the backups. Like, he was playing power forward and then swap over to center, coming off the bench a lot this year as well. But John Collins was the best player for the Jazz. He gets traded to the Clippers team, where he's going to be paired with James Harden, who's one of the best lob throwers in the entire NBA. So John Collins made a living off of catching lobs back in Atlanta with Trae Young. But adding him and not having to pay Norman Powell is one of the biggest reasons why this Clippers team was able to come together. They were then able to go out and sign Brook Lopez, who's going to be their backup center, I'm guessing. There's no way that he's starting over Zubats. Zubats had one of the best breakout seasons, just like players like John Collins or Norman Powell. He had a great breakout season. He was probably a top 5 might be a stretch, but he's one of the best centers in the entire NBA, and he proved that last year. So he's definitely the starting center. But having Brook Lopez come off the bench is one of the biggest upgrades they needed as well. Their power forward spot was really weak, like I was talking before. but their backup center position was honestly killing them. If Zoo wasn't in the game, then they didn't really have a competent center that you wanted out on the floor. And if he got in foul trouble and had to sit out for long periods of time, there really wasn't a whole lot the Clippers could do. They don't have a lot of great rebounders outside of him. But Brook Lopez, just a couple seasons ago, was an all-star, but also he was starting for the Bucks last season, and now he's on this team coming off the bench, playing a smaller role, can come in, play 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes a game, whatever it is. He can come in, and when Zoo goes to the bench, you don't have to worry about your center play as much anymore. I feel like they're pretty equal on defense, or at least style-wise. They're both not the fastest, quick-footed centers, but they're also both pretty good rim protectors for the most part. Brook Lopez, for the longest time was a really, really good back line of defense for the Bucks. Having, he would guard the center, and Giannis would be more of the roamer type of player. He's not necessarily going to have that line of defense behind him now, but he's a great rim protector, and he's honestly exactly what the Clippers need off the bench. So being able to sign him off from the Bucks and getting him on your team to be your backup center, another huge upgrade. But after you traded away Norman Powell and got John Collins, there was kind of this hole in the shooting guard spot. Either in you can move Chris Dunn to the starting lineup, have him play there, and then you need someone off the bench. And that's kind of where, this Bradley Beal whole situation comes together. You were able to sign Bradley Beal, a player that, in my opinion, is nearly identical to Norman Powell at this point. Obviously, Bradley Beal in the past was a much better player than Norman Powell, but I feel like they have a very similar play style. They probably are going to average about the same points this year together as Norman Powell would have last season. I feel like they're just very similar players. They're both not the greatest defenders. Honestly, when I look at them, there's not two players that are nearly identical, you compare them in their situations, that would fit the same on this team as Bradley Beal does. But there's a lot of discussions if people think that he's going to start or if they're going to have him come off the bench just because of backcourt of James Harden and Bradley Beal isn't the greatest defensive lineup. So I kind of want to go over the starting lineup a little bit. We might go over that a little bit later. But one thing I did want to talk about before we get to Chris Paul signing back is the reason this was all possible was because James Harden came back on a friendly deal. He signed, if I'm not mistaken, he signed a 2-year deal that was worth about $80 million, which is still a ton of money, but it wasn't the most money he could have taken. He could have taken, maybe another $10 million each year, but he took that deal and was able to make it so they could sign players like Brook Lopez. They could be able to sign players like Bradley Beal. They could bring in John Collins. And a lot of people think of James Harden as this really selfish player, but in reality, he took this pay cut, and he also took a pay cut in Philadelphia as well, and people don't give him credit for that. People don't think of James Harden as a winner because they think of him as this selfish player, when in reality, every team he's ever played for has been a really good team that's won lots of games. He's made it in the playoffs deep many times when he was on the Rockets, a little bit with the Nets. Every team that he's played with has always exceeded expectations, won lots of games, even last year when people thought this team was going to be really, really bad. And this Clippers team turned out to be, one of the probably the biggest surprise in the entire NBA. And they were, like I said earlier, they were able to go into the first round of the playoffs and push a really, really good Nuggets team to 7 games. And then they just added all of these great players. And I haven't even talked about Chris Paul yet. But a lot of that was because of James Harden. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard plays a big part in this too. But as we know, he's not the most reliable person with his health. And James Harden was able to become the system like he's talked about before. James Harden is the system. And he did a great job, rallying this team and making it so that they could be in this position that they were. And they're in the same position now of being able to sign all these players. But the next part I want to talk about is Chris Paul making his return. I got to say, I am loving, these players coming back to their original teams. When I think of Chris Paul, I mostly think of him when he played for the Clippers. That was probably right around the time I started watching basketball. I was a little young when he was, first drafted and was playing for the Hornets. But I remember when I first started watching, he was on the Clippers, and he's finally made full circle. And he's made full circle with two things, because he's made full circle coming back to LA to play on the Clippers, but he's also teaming back up with his former teammate James Harden. Those two had a great run when they were back in Houston, and like I was talking about, Harden had a lot of success, has won lots of games, and a lot of that was due to Chris Paul as well. They were on the same team for a long time. They were probably one of the teams that, if the Golden State Warriors weren't a thing, they might have multiple championships. If you think about it, that Rockets team, if the Warriors weren't there, could maybe have 2 championships. They pushed that team the hardest any team ever had. And, they had that game 7 with the Warriors, when the Warriors came back from 3-1 and the Rockets missed like 28 3-pointers in a row, or shot like 10% from the 3-point line, which was, super abnormal for them. And especially with how good of a 3-point shooting team they were. But anyways, those 2 players, they're back on the same team. They definitely had their moments on the Rockets where they were butting heads and having problems. But at the end of the day, Chris Paul is coming in. There's going to be moments or games where he doesn't play as much, or maybe even gets DMP's coach's decisions not playing. And I think that's okay. And I think he knows that. He's happy to be back in LA, happy to be home, and happy to be in a position where he can be on a winning team, reunited back with old teammates, old teams, and not having to have this huge load. But with that being said, he's the perfect player to come off their bench, run that second unit. I do see a problem with him and Bradley Beal if they're both coming in together at backcourt for defense. But I think there's ways you can work around that. You have great defenders on this team, and you can probably hide those players to a certain extent, and they're not going to be playing long minutes together. But it's great to have Chris Paul on your team, have a backup point guard that can come in, and he's got the nickname the point guard for a reason. He can come in and he can run that second unit better than any backup point guard could. So adding him is huge, even though he's literally 40 years old. But I want to jump into who I think the starting lineup is going to be. Obviously, we're going to have Harden, we're going to have Kawhi, we're going to have Zoo, and then we're going to have the newcomer, John Collins, who's going to play the power forward position. I think he's going to be, the biggest player they got this offseason that wasn't already on their team. He's going to be the most important one out of all these people. And then I'm having a hard time deciding. I think initially it'll be Bradley Beal will be starting, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw times where we saw Chris Dunn come in. Chris Dunn is, one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA. He's been a point guard, shooting guard his whole career. Came in initially and played a lot of point guard, but he's a 6'6" guard that has super, super long arms, gets into the passing lanes. If you're a Clippers fan, you've probably seen this. If you're a Jazz fan, you saw this when he made his return back to the NBA. He's a great defender. He's always in the passing lanes. He just doesn't make it easy for teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if they put him in the starting lineup to have a bigger guard to go along with James Harden and a better defender as well. The only problem with him is he's not the greatest three-point shooter. He's definitely streaky. He has his moments where he's an able three-point shooter, but then he also has those times where he's going to throw up and miss 5 three-pointers in a single game, which isn't abnormal for him. But it's what he brings in the defensive end, and he's really a really big guard as well, which is really beneficial for, maybe playing with players like Chris Paul, who's a little smaller, or Bradley Beal, who's not a great defender. So I think initially it might be Bradley Beal starting. Depending upon how well he meshes or how well the team's defense is, we might see Bradley Beal come in. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about is Kawhi Leonard. It's crazy that I've talked about the Clippers for, however long I've been doing this video for. I don't know exactly how long it's been. But I've gone this long without talking about Kawhi Leonard, who is one of the best players in the world when he's healthy. He's literally an MVP candidate. I know people are going to get mad about this, but he's literally an MVP candidate, one of the best players in the world when he's healthy. The problem is he's not healthy very often, and it's usually not for very long. But we've seen in the past, if you put Kawhi Leonard, a healthy Kawhi Leonard with, solid players around him, I'm not saying he needs, a great co-star, a all-NBA level co-star. He doesn't need he doesn't need a Robin that's, an all NBA level player. Obviously, he's got Harden, but he's a little older. He's, a lower end all-star at this moment, might be a player that doesn't make it this year. He's one of those players that's really, at this point in his career could be either an all-star or not. But that's the thing with Kawhi Leonard. He's not the type of person that needs another superstar in his team in order to have, a really good season, to be able to push this team to their limits. We saw this with the Raptors. The Raptors did have good players. Pascal Siakam was an all-star eventually. Fred VanVleet was an all-star eventually. There was a lot of good players on that team, but when he was on that team, they weren't all-stars yet. I don't think Pascal Siakam had become an all-star yet. Fred VanVleet wasn't an all-star yet. You saw players like Marc Gasol come in and be able to play big minutes for this team. And at that time, none of those players were big name players. They weren't all-stars. They were just really, really good, solid role players. And Kawhi Leonard can take players like that, when healthy, when he's at 100%, and, can carry a team, can push a team to their limits. We saw them, win against the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, the Warriors were hurt in that finals, but they were able to make it out of the Eastern Conference and win a championship with only having one star on their team and a lot of really good role players. And when I look at this Clippers team, I feel, the same way as I felt about that Raptors team, how if Kawhi Leonard's healthy, the sky's the limit. The Eastern Conference is really, really, really weak. And I don't think there's going to be a champion out of the Eastern Conference because the Western Conference is so strong. And that's the only downside to the Clippers right now, is there's legitimately 8 title contenders in the Western Conference. If they were in the Eastern Conference, they might be my title favorite right now, but because the Western Conference is so strong, they have the Thunder, they have the Nuggets, who got even better this offseason as well. I could go on and on. The Lakers, the Grizzlies, there's all these teams. Literally, all 8 playoff spot teams. Obviously, I'd be surprised if some of the lower teams won. If the Rockets made a big jump, they probably had the best offseason or pretty close to the same level as the Clippers. If they won, I wouldn't be surprised. There's legitimately 8 Western Conference teams that I wouldn't be surprised if, they made it to the Western Conference Finals or made it to the finals or won the finals. And that's the only downside for the Clippers. The Eastern Conference is super weak, but the Western Conference is so deep. But the thing is with Kawhi Leonard, I just can't count him out. It's kind of how I feel about Giannis as well. You just can't count these type of players out, these, all-time great players. But especially Kawhi Leonard, as he's able to turn up in the playoffs, he's able to, carry these teams without a super big co-star on his team. And I'm just excited for the Clippers this season. I think they're going to be really good. I know there's a lot of big heavy hitters in the Western Conference like I've been talking about, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were the 3 or 4, or maybe even the 2 seed. But you just never know what's going to happen in the playoffs, especially with how good the Western Conference is. But it's a hard gauge for me to see. I wouldn't be surprised if they won the championship. That's their peak range is a championship. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they were, the 6th seed. I think the 6th seed is probably their low point, and a championship is their high, which is a pretty big range. But I also think it's kind of exciting if you're a Clippers fan or just a basketball fan in general, where you have so many of these teams that are, hitters that could go out and, win you a championship, or you don't know if they're going to even, be a lower end playoff team. But I think it's going to be an exciting year of Clippers basketball. As long as these players can stay healthy. I saw a report, I don't know if it's true, but they have the oldest roster currently in the entire NBA history. And they most definitely have the oldest roster out of any current NBA team. But it's going to be interesting to see, how they rest these players, how they played in the regular season. I'm hoping the Clippers have learned their lesson, of just trying to rest players, prepare for the playoffs. We haven't really seen that work for them, but I'm hoping that it works out. Obviously, I don't hope anyone gets injured, but especially I want to see how this plays out with this Clippers team. But it's going to be an exciting, year of basketball, and I'm going to be tuning into a lot of Clippers games this season.